Hello everyone, it's Seth, probably better known as Saffron Olive, and it's time for another edition of Against the Odds. So last week on our Against the Odds poll, it was Startled Awake in Standard, coming in on top in a very tight race, Werewolves in Modern, and also Zada plus Silverfur Partisan. We're really close, but Startled Awake pulled it out in the end. So this week, we get to play a super sweet Startled Awake Jeskai deck in Standard, calling it Startling Jeskai. Anyway, let's break it down. So first off, the name state card, Startled Awake, essentially 4 mana, mill 13, but then it has an ability where you can pay 3 and 2 blue, return it to the battlefield transformed as a 1/1 Skulk. So it can be blocked by creatures with greater power. And then if it deals damage, you get to bounce it back to your hand. So when I started building this deck, I thought it would be really sweet to be able to cast Startled Awake, transform it, put it back on the battlefield, get in damage, get it back to our hand, cast it again. But that's just not very practical for a couple reasons. First off, a lot of the removal in Standard exiles, Anguish Unmaking, Declaration in Stone, so that puts an end to that plan forever. Plus, that is just super slow for Constructed. I don't know how you actually make that work in Constructed, just because it's so mana intensive and so slow and pretty easy to disrupt. It requires dealing combat damage with a 1/1, which just isn't very easy. So, I decided instead that what we needed to do was focus on the mill 13 part of Startled Awake. So, considering that you play a 60-card Constructed deck and you draw an opening hand of 7, we need to resolve 4 copies of Startled Awake to win the game. Unfortunately, you can't really just count on drawing all 4 Startled Awakes. That's leaving way too much to chance. So what we had to do is figure out a way to cast the same copy of Startled Awake multiple times. So the reason we went Jeskai is we have all the best ways of doubling and tripling up on our Startled Awake. Jeskai Prodigy, when it flips around to a Planeswalker, lets us flashback a spell. So we can cast the Startled Awake, use the Planeswalker side of Jace to flash it back, so we get to cast 2 Startled Awakes with only 1 card using Jeskai Prodigy. Narset Transcendent kind of does the same thing, except it rebounds. So if we have a Narset, we can -2, cast a Startled Awake, we mill 13, Startled Awake gets exiled, and then on our next turn, we get to cast it again, mill another 13, and then Geist Blast is a pretty spicy one. On its front side, it's a removal spell, 2 damage to a creature or player, but then in the late game, it becomes this uncounterable fork effect, so you can exile it from your graveyard by paying 2 and a blue, and copy an instant or sorcery spell you control, and choose new targets for it. But if we get up to 7 mana, and we have a Geist Blast in the graveyard, we can cast a Startled Awake, copy it using Geist Blast, and mill 26 instead of 13. So with these cards, we only need to find maybe 2 copies of Startled Awake instead of 4 to actually be able to win the game, because we can use each copy multiple times. So that's the plan. We can even triple it up in some cases. Like, it's definitely possible to Narset. I guess we can even get 4 uses if we have the absolute nut draw. We can Narset to rebound it, and then on the rebound, we cast the Geist Blast to copy it, and then eventually use the Jace to flash it back. So we can eventually cast the same Startled Awake 4 times if things go perfectly right, but it's more likely we're going to need 2 Startled Awakes and kind of split it up over those cards. We do have a couple other mill spells. That's the other thing I realized building this deck, is there are not a lot of good mill spells in Standard. So the second best is Talent of the Telepath. You mill 7 for 4 mana, but you get to cast 1, or if you have Spell Mastery, 2 instants or sorceries among the cards you mill. So Talent of the Telepath is not a great mill spell. Milling 7 for 4 is pretty below the curve. And its ability to cast spells, when it's good, it's like the spell version of Collected Company, except you're using your opponent's deck. So if you're playing against an opponent who has a ton of spells in their deck, it can be really powerful. On the other hand, a lot of decks in Standard today are either overloaded on creatures for Collected Company, or even the control decks are overloaded on Planeswalkers. And against those decks, Talent of the Telepath is most often mill 7 for 4, which isn't a great deal. So it's really high variance when it's good. It is incredibly good, but a lot of times it's kind of mediocre to below average. And then 2 copies of Vessel of Paramnesia. Oh, the card is so bad, but in all honesty, I think it is the 3rd best mill card in Standard. So you mill 3 for a total of 3 mana, since you got to pay 2 to cast it, 1 to sack it, but you do get to draw a card, which makes it a little bit better. But if we, with some combination of Talent of the Telepath and Vessel, we can usually make it so instead of needing to resolve 4 copies of Startled Awake, we only need to resolve 3 to win the game. So that's why they're in the deck. Then the rest of the deck is pretty much a removal-heavy control deck. So Fiery Impulses, Fiery Temper, kill early creatures. Fiery Temper can also hit Planeswalkers. Then we have the Wrath package. We got 4 Radiant Flames, good against Bant Company, humans, all these like creature-heavy little creature decks. Chandra, another Wrath effect, can also close out the game in a pinch, and it can help us cycle through our deck to find more copies of Startled Awake with the 0 ability. And then Descend Upon the Sinful, kind of hit or miss. When it's just 6 mana exile all creatures, it's not awesome, kind of expensive for what it does, although it is helpful against some of like the aristocrat type builds that really care about their creatures going to the graveyard. Being able to exile things is relevant. When you have Delirium and get a 4/4 afterwards, it's actually pretty powerful, but it's just a Wrath that is better against like aristocrats and against Den Protectors and Death Mist Raptors and such than Planar Outburst is. Then 2 copies of Negate to deal with spells, and then a single Dragon Lord's Prerogative just to help us cycle through our deck and keep drawing cards. Mana base wise, a bunch of creature lands, a bunch of duo lands, and some basics. So pretty straightforward. The creature lands are also a kind of a plan C for winning the game. They can also block and help keep us alive. In the sideboard, we get a bunch more removal. So the 4th Fiery Impulse, Rending Volley, mostly there because it is a good way to kill Avacyn, and Avacyn definitely needs killing. Stasis Snare, also a decent way to kill Avacyn, plus it can hit an animated Gideon, which is relevant. And Quarantine Field can get rid of a couple Planeswalkers, which, with all the Super Friends decks running around, is actually pretty reasonable. And it's a little bit better. Dramoka's Command still gets it, but there's no longer an Ugin type card in these Super Friends lists that can just come down and blow you out for playing a Quarantine Field. So I think it's gotten a little bit better. And then we have some more Wraths. We do have a Planar Outburst, another Descend Upon the Sinful, and a Chandra. And then 2 more Talent of the Telepath. Like I said, in matchups where Talent of the Telepath is good, it is very, very good. If you run into a deck that's playing Read the Bones, in a deck that's playing lots of big burn spell, even a deck that's playing Wraths, Talent of the Telepath can be really solid. So in those matchups, we can go up to the full 4, and then in matchups where it's bad, we actually sideboard them out some amount of the time as well. So we can go up and down based on the matchup. Fate Forgotten takes care of artifacts or enchantments, more negates for the counter spells, and that is Startling Jeskai. So, how good this deck is, I'm not sure. I think we get to play a lot of good cards. I mean, as you can see, we got Jace, which is powerful. We have some good removal. 4 Narsets is a little crazy. Like, Narset's been seeing more play, but it's still not usually a 4 of. But we have Wraths and we have the tools to slow down the game. So I think we'll be able to win some matches, but I don't know. I don't know overall. I'm going to say that we win about, maybe 35%, 40% of the time. I think the deck is good enough to win a reasonable amount, but I don't expect it to be a great deck or anything like that. But we'll see how it goes. I think it should be fun to play, and being able to double or triple up a Startled Awake with some of our spells should be pretty sweet, so I'm definitely excited to see if that works. Anyway, make sure to check out the website, mtggoldfish.com. If you enjoyed the Startling Jeskai videos, make sure to click the like button, the subscribe button that are about to pop up on the bottom of your screen. Anyway, I hope you enjoy Startling Jeskai in Standard for our Against the Odds this week. Thank you very, very much for watching, and I will talk to you soon.